right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is Tuesday, May 16th. We have entered week 3, and you've just submitted your second round of assignments where you have wrapped up your 2D platformer game composition. We have you have finished out your composition from week 1. Maybe you did a passive revisions on it. You have created all of the sound effects for 2D platformer. A lot of those were probably recorded with your voice. And then this week you also had the opportunity to put them into the game and test them out and make any changes that are necessary. And then you wrapped up everything by creating a full video capture of your music and your sound effects working in the game. And now that you have done the first project, you kind of understand or got a feel for the flow of how we're going to work on our next project in weeks 3 and week 4. So we have a new game starting here in week 3. Which requires new music, of course, and a new overall approach to that music. We'll talk about how a new game or a different game requires a different approach and how we will kind of deconstruct what is necessary for that game and create a new music system that this time is going to deal with the idea of ambient and action. So we'll get into that after a couple of submissions. And we had, last time we didn't have any submissions, so I sent out an archive with some submissions from the previous month. I'm going to do that again because we do have limited submissions here. And let me just talk about what I did receive. So we have 2 working submissions. This first one here has the music and the sound effects recorded in the audio correctly. This one, the video is recorded correctly, but the audio doesn't sound like it was actually recorded digitally. It sounds like it was recorded through the microphone on the computer, but we can still hear a little bit what the audio sounds like with the music and the sound effects. Then we did have 2 other submissions in the discussion post, but when I followed these links here, it led me to video is unavailable. So, and just to double check what I did here, make sure that I didn't copy anything crazy. So yeah, that first one here, Zavius Muhammad, hopefully I got that right, and then also Melvin Hardiman. Let me just double check my link here. What is that? LE0. And I got the same thing. More than likely, this is a permissions issue on the video. And you can just update and change that. But I did not receive those, or I was not able to access, I guess that's a better way of saying it. So double check those. So we'll take a listen to these 2, and then I'm going to switch over to the archive and pick up with that one because it's got a couple more submissions that you can take a listen to. And then, of course, the rest of the presentation. So let me double check that this is actually going to play back correctly. Let's see here. I think that, and then the question is, do I actually have control of the volume? I'm going to turn this down. Let me see if this plays. Let me see if I can hear it also. Oh, that's okay, Kashi. Lightning storms are real bad in the area. Oh, yes. As a Floridian, I certainly understand that. All right. Okay, so that seems to be working. We can hear the music We can hear sound effects. You guys can hear that also. That's broadcasting, hopefully. And let me pause that again. Hold on. All right, and looks like we also have another submission. That's excellent. So let me open this up. And see. Stop. Okay, excellent. That's going to work. Cool. So we got 2 to listen, or 3 total to listen to. That should work. All right. So let me just talk in a general sense about the submissions kind of at this point. Now, I have you do a video because the video is going to be probably your best resource to show off the work that you've done. You have the Mac applications. These are fully working Mac games, and now that you have placed your WAV files in, you went through that process, placed them in a very specific folder, tested it out, made sure everything is working, and now that that process is done, you can actually just take the application, the game icon, and zip that up and email it to somebody or put it on Dropbox and have them download it or on your website. The game itself is totally portable and you can send it around to anybody. But of course, there's limitations in that. There's limitations in the fact that they certainly have to have a Mac computer to make everything run. They have to have a computer that's fast enough to make the games run, but more than likely that's fine. But there's also little guarantee that the actual application is going to continue to run a year or 5 or 10 years from now when the software gets updated, the computer changes. Apple has a history of just kind of updating their software and leaving old software behind. So, however, a video capture is going to last much longer, and anybody can view it. They don't have to have a Mac computer to run the application. And most people won't feel very comfortable with downloading a random application online, right? You shouldn't probably include it as an attachment because those typically get into spam filters, and a lot of folks, if you're sending this off to a prospective client or an employer, then they don't like to download random files onto their internet, onto the computer, especially if it means that they have to run the application. So everybody feels comfortable with a YouTube link that they can click on and watch a video and check out your work. Plus, the video gives you control over exactly what you want to show. Sometimes you'll get into the situation, it may not be for this game, but in other games, where they either hate the game so much that they lump your music into it and they hate your music right along with it, or they love the game so much that they haven't even been paying attention to your music and it takes them 4 or 5 times to actually stop to pay attention to what they're supposed to. Or they do the wrong thing and they don't actually hear the music in the way that you want. So a video is a directed control of the game where you can show exactly what you want. When I go through and grade these, I'm not grading well, number one, I'm certainly not grading you on how you play the game, or your score, or the how long you stay alive, or anything like that. Your actual playing of the game is of no issue, because I think you can just stand there and your music will just kind of move around, and you should try to trigger as many sound effects as you can in the amount of time. You have about 60 to 90 seconds. These videos should be somewhere around there, because you're not really going to keep somebody's interest in the video much longer than that. The videos should show off as much music as you can and as much sound effects as you can. But I'm not grading you on every single sound effect, like counting all 22 sound effects and all 9 music files, because that I know that you ultimately don't have control over what music and sound plays. So a lot of times within a minute or so, people will trigger 8 out of the 9 files, but for some reason that third ending just never plays. So I'm not concerned about that so much as the whole process. By having a video with the audio, music, and sound effects correctly recorded, that means that you've created the music, tested it out, made any revisions, created all the sound effects and tested those out, made any revisions, put it into the game, changed levels and mix overall, got it technically working in the game, and then we're able to use the video capture to capture the video and audio exactly as you wanted. So that if it's another game at some other time, or you change all the music and sounds in this game at some point, or you want to redo a video, it's really the process of capturing the video to show something off. The content is up to you. What you want to show off with your music, that part is ultimately your added to your demo reel. It's your project to demonstrate. So, and the other thing that I often find is when we do peer review after week 1, where we have all of the files loaded into Logic, and we go through all of the waveforms, and I click around and I talk about different aspects of it, I can go through it and pick it apart with every detail because I'm looking at the waveforms and I'm clicking around in Logic, and I have a lot more control. And so I might identify things that get lost and kind of get glossed over in the full effect of the game, which can be a good thing. Because now, instead of having the music separate, I have the music along with the sound effects, along with the graphics, and the gameplay. So typically the final video is greater than the sum of the parts, meaning that individually you might find issues overall, but once you put it all together and then the game adds that layer of interactivity on top of it, it comes through sounding much more alive and real, not realistic, because I mean it's a bean with a bazooka, but much more kind of a complete project. So yeah, let's take a listen here. And if you had any issues, or if there's anything you wanted to discuss, then let me know. But yeah, we'll just take a listen to the first submission here.
Going up. That hurt. Help!
I'm enjoying the dialogue in there, the taunts. Let's see there. Low health here. Oh, any more. It's my buffering. I guess I wait. There it goes. Let's try for an ending here. All right, so a couple of things that I noticed overall was the gunshots pretty loud in the mix. I don't know necessarily about bringing it down as much as the other elements up to compete with that. So it probably will mean, since the problem with the gunshot is it's so constant, most of the time whoever's playing it is constantly hitting that button. So it can actually come down in volume because it is more consistent. The dialogue, like all the taunts and the ouches, those are the fun parts. Those can come up too. And your music could definitely come up. And this is often a discussion that I come to, which is how do you mix music versus sound effects? Because most of the time in most games, sound effects are most present because they provide information in the game. Like, you need to know that you shot the gun, or you hit an enemy, or you jumped or landed or punched or whatever it is. Those sound effects are often pretty present in the mix. However, for our purposes, this is it's a music demo in most regards. So for your mix, I would probably bring the music up a bit more so that it could be kind of focused and paid attention to a bit more. So, but I like all the sounds. I think everything transitions and works well together. Maybe for the demo purposes, you might like die more often, so you can show all the endings off and show more intros. You're kind of more playing it like to actually win, which is perfectly fine. But when you got that power up, I was waiting for an ending here. So when it does end. It does end right about here.
Going up.
Maybe. So you want to probably make sure just it actually kind of creates a stronger ending and a stronger build. Compositionally, that's what I hear. Like it felt more like an extension of the main loops as opposed to a real strong ending there. But everything works well, so definitely nice work in getting all that stuff set up. Let's go ahead and take a listen to our second submission here. Starting like, let me turn this down. There we go.
Bye-bye. Come on. Bye-bye. Boom. Ha-ha. Come on. Boom. Boom.
Looks like my video's stuttering a little bit.
Bye-bye.
Nice dodge.
Ow.
There you go. Very good. Excellent. So I think the music works very well. It's got a good kind of rhythm and bounce to it, and a good melody that develops well. Yeah, I'd kind of say the same thing when you said you have one life. And I do want to say, for the purposes of the video, again, I'm not counting the intros and endings, so that I won't mark you off for that. But just in general, as you're showing this off, you worked on all the different intros and endings. You want to be able to show those in the video too. So just something to consider. And I like the sound of the gunshot, and I like the dialogue. Like again, the ouches and taunts. All those are fun. Like the bombs away, or bye bye. What else did I find? Let me check out that ending again. Yeah, I think that worked out well. Actually, I just noticed this in the ending. In your video, you captured in the background. There's this red the double-decker bus that drives by, and in your video here at the very end, I have not figured this out yet, but every once in a while it will drive by. Where'd it go? With just the wheels. There it goes. Actually, did it disappear halfway through? Just Let's see there. Right here. Oh, yeah, it does. It disappeared on death. Maybe that's something. I have never figured out what that is in the game. And it honestly, it has something to do with graphics and not my forte by any means. But I did just notice that it happened on death. Boom. And the wheels just drive away, which I always find hilarious. Let me jump back over here. Let me see if yours does that.
Bro.
Oops. I guess you would have to have the bus driving by at the right moment. Let's see. Nope. Oh, no, there it goes. Okay, yours did it too. Maybe I'm onto something. Maybe it's during the death, when the death or the ending music plays. Anyway, just something I noticed. Has nothing to do with your music or any of the music, but always fun. So here's our third one, and as you'll hear in just a moment, it sounds like it was recorded from the output of the speakers into the onboard microphone of the computer. And so the audio quality is not all that great, but you can still kind of hear what's going on. And I remember listening to this one. We had like a pretty fun like banjo lead line with a little slide guitar in there, an electric piano. So, not hearing too much of the sound effects overall. And actually, it might be the original sound effects. So watch out for that. Yeah, I can hear it through the microphone. Oh, you got caught in the spotlight. Oh, there it goes. All right, so I think the music works well, and I would just double check the sound effects and of course, double check using loopback to make sure you capture everything. So, you hear the original dialogue. Yeah, so it's the original sound effects from the game. You want to replace those, and you want to fix the actual recording. All right, so those are the submissions that I have, and they end up being real fun to check out all of the kind of the finished product overall. So if you had any of the ones that didn't work, or you wanted to submit those, you can submit them for the peer review next round, and just double check your links, and we'll take a listen to those. So I'm going to pause this here and then transition over to the previous archives so that you can take a listen to a couple more submissions, and then move on into the actual new assignments for week 3. So please let me know if you have any questions after that. Thanks. Well, and we are entering into our third week of the class. You have just kind of rounded out your first project, your whole project for a 2D platformer, finishing out the music and sound effects, putting it into the game, and doing a video capture, kind of showing off the entire process. So in the span of 2 weeks, you've gotten a new game project. You have determined the overall intention for the soundtrack that you create, and you have composed the music, mixed it and formatted it and bounced it out and set it up to actually work in a game format, built all of the sound effects. Hopefully you got it working in the game with little to no issue. Typically, there is maybe some technical issues as you put the music in and sound effects into the game and try the game, and things may not work out correctly. So you go back and check either your music or check your bounced files, check your sound effects, and eventually get everything working properly in the game. And then you ended up doing a video capture of the final product. And so we have a couple of submissions here for peer review. So I've got a couple of tabs of YouTube videos ready to check out here. So we will start out our session this afternoon with a look back at the kind of the finished version of 2D platformer from week 2, and then we will dive into your new game project. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to download download all of the materials, all of the documentation, the game itself, the videos, and had an opportunity to read through some things and play the game, and maybe get some general ideas or some questions together for this project. And of course, we'll go through it in a lot of detail with examples and different things to talk about. So here we got a good question here in the chat. It says, so how do you know when your levels are appropriate for the game? So we had we're just talking a little bit about mixing, and how mixing for a game is certainly unique, and you got a bit of a taste of that working on this project, because you had the music and not only the full music composition and mix there, but you also had sound effects, and those are typically built separately in another Logic session. And you have that mix overall, and then you combine them together in the game, and there are some creative questions of what do you want to show off, how loud should things be, what should the final level be, and there's a little bit of a different answer for our projects versus the professional game. So I'll start there. In a professional project, the real answer to how do you know when your levels are set, or what to set your levels at, is there is a certification process by Sony and Microsoft and Nintendo. So if you want to release a game on a PlayStation or an Xbox or a Nintendo, there are certain standard levels that are sort of agreed upon by the developer and by the hardware manufacturer. But they set their levels. I mentioned earlier that it's a little bit different than the film industry, where often you have a group like Dolby who comes in and sets standards for movie theaters and for home theater equipment, speakers and receivers and amplifiers and things like that. So there is less of that standard and certification in the games industry. Currently, it's held by the hardware manufacturers, Nintendo, Sony, and PlayStation. On Mac and PC, PC, it's kind of Wild West. On Mac and iOS, and it's more from Android's point of view. Apple's point of view. And on Android, it's Google. So the general standard that has been coming about, and this is only in the past couple of years, is around negative 24 decibels LUFS, LUFS, which is a metering standard that has been set up by the European Broadcast Union. So just in the same way that we talk about dBs and decibels and dB full scale and different types of metering, there is a very popular and relatively new standard out there called LUFS, and that stands for loudness unit, and they and it's also in French, I think. But they have come up with a general standard that a lot of new hardware is adopting, and that is games are around negative 24 decibel or negative 24 lufs, I shouldn't say dB. Then that is over 30 minutes of gameplay. So what they'll do is they'll play your game for 30 minutes and measure the average level, and without anything going over zero. So that's the big professional answer. The more appropriate answer for our projects is there's an element of it that says you have ultimate control, because since you are mixing all aspects of the music, all aspects of the audio, both music and sound effects, you ultimately have final control over it. The suggested level would be certainly with your peak level, no peaks going over zero, probably peaks around -1 to negative like 0 point or 0.2 or right somewhere right up there, and peaking around 1 commonly that's a little bit more appropriate. For average level, for your RMS level, somewhere between -20 and -10 for an RMS. So constant all the time at -10 RMS is pretty loud. It depends on what the style of music is, but somewhere in there. So the real short answer to your question is no peaks going over zero and an RMS level between -10 and -20. And beyond that, it depends on the music and the sound effects. Then the other question is, typically in gameplay, sound effects are the most present or the loudest because they are the information in the game. Something like the gunshot in this game is almost constant. It's very, very present. It's always there. So you may not need as much a level on the gunshot because it's a very sharp sound typically, and it's always there. But it's also a very important sound. The other side of that is we're music composers, and this is mostly a music demo. So your music can typically be mixed a little bit louder against the sound effects, so that your music can be heard and it can be a good demo. So those are some of the creative questions. I don't really have a short answer to that by any means. But ultimately, it is as long as you are listening and paying attention and balancing your music against your sound effects, then you have final control over the result. So let's take a listen to some examples that we have. Right here. So I have, well, there were 4 submissions, but a couple of them did not work. Let's see. So Nathan Allen, when you submitted, I went and checked this. When it comes up on YouTube, you can probably check this on FSO on your side. It says the video is unavailable. I also checked where you submitted it, and it says the same thing. So unfortunately, I can't check this one out. Terry Phillips, when you submitted it on the peer review, it did not work. But I went off to where you actually submitted it on the composition description, and we can reference that. So we're going to take a listen there. Get that one set up. So always, just double check the YouTube links on the submissions. Michael, we got yours. That one worked. And Tommy, we have yours. So we have 1, 2. Wait, sorry, we have 3 in total to check out. So Let's make sure that this is actually broadcasting and recording, but I think it is. We'll take a listen to it, and I might jump around a little bit in the video to point out a few things. All right, that looks like it's working. All right, so I think the So I think the sound effects are definitely fun. They work for the style of the game. I think the main loops are a little bit kind of slow and laid back. They're not very upbeat, and they need to be a little bit more like staccato and bouncy and faster. And some of that might also come from the instrumentation is a little bit light in the main loops. That's why when we hit the ending there, the drums really jump out. Turn this back up here. Catch one of the endings. So pretty light on the percussion, and then the music, I don't know if it's the overall volume of the endings is louder, but the music is more present through that section, or the drums are certainly louder. So a little bit more energy. Yeah, what you have in the intros and endings. All right, this pattern is a little stronger. Maybe it was a particular one that we were hearing. Yeah, I think it may be just one or two of the main loops that we're hearing. So a little bit more energy from the drums and the percussion there. But otherwise, it fits well together. Let's check out the next one here.
Feel the pain. Heat. That's how I do it. Right here. Feel the pain. Take that. Heat. That's how I do it.
Sound effects work well.
Feel the pain.
Mixed appropriately. Oh, you captured. There is a bug in this game, and I haven't. It's a graphic bug, so I've never figured it out. But you actually captured it.
Feel the pain.
Here you see a bus go by that's just wheels and no actual bus connected to it. That happens every once in a while. I've never been able to figure out what that is.
Feel the
Endings work well. They resolve nicely.
Feel the pain.
I would put maybe some more of the
Right here. Take that.
main loop
That's
instrumentation in the intros, because it sounds like
Feel the pain.
you have them in the
Heat.
endings, but they need to also be more present in the intros.
Right here. Feel the pain. Take that. Heat. That's how I do it. Feel the pain.
Cool. So I think that works out very well. Did you have any issues making it work, or did you have any issues in with maybe beyond the composition, the sound design, actually having it work in the game, or anything you needed to tweak? I'm always interested in things that need to be changed. or any issues that were encountered. Here in the chat, no, not at all. Just had to go back a few times to check levels. Yeah, it's you really don't get the full picture of everything until you put it in the game and test it out. Some of it is a guessing game as you are going, and that's going to always be the case. So, that can be part of the challenge because you're working with individual components. Like I always think of it as individual Lego bricks that you're figuring out and putting them together and in little chunks, and eventually you're not going to see the full thing until you put it all together. And some of that, well, a lot of the ending stuff, mixing, mastering, all of that hinges on making it work in the first place. So there's often a lot of revision of going around and around and back and forth. All right, let's check out our third one here.
Up. Smashing good time. Jiminy go. Hung. That's fire in the hole. Jiminy. Jolly good chap. That's smart. That's smart. Smarts. That's smarts. Fire in the hole.
I think the sound effects work out very well.
That's smarts.
All right,
Up we go.
endings work. The music is a bit kind of light and sparse, which could actually work as kind of undertone to the action that's going on in the game. So that's, again,
Good time. Up. That's smarts. Jiminy.
Jiminy.
Smarts.
Let's see here. So that's some of the question of, let's see. Go back. There we go. That is some of the question when it is, I would think that would be an appropriate mix for a game. But if the music had a little bit more energy or a little bit more presence to it, I think it would work better to have the music a bit more forward for the demo. So you have the focus there. But if it really depends on what you are, what you're kind of focused on, what you're showing off. But all three of those, the main thing to focus on is it all works. All of the things that I've discussed is, and really when it hits this stage, it's more of the creativity. It's more of how does it sound? How appropriate is the music? How does it transition and work from one piece of music to the next? Those are the much better things to be talking about. And those are much more of the things you want to focus on in this process, where really you probably wouldn't even have a video if you hadn't gotten through the process of creating the music, bouncing it out correctly, looping it, making sure, like you mentioned, checking the levels and going back and forth and balancing everything out, doing the video capture, getting through that process. There's a lot of the journey and the process involved until you get to the final version, and everybody looks at it and goes, "Okay, that's good. That's what we were going for. But try this, this, and this, and tweak these things and adjust this part of it." And that's typically where the client comes in and says yes to this and no to that, and gets their feels like they're involved and gets their say in. And then often you take that piece of music or that composition, that project that's 80% of the way there now, and you go back and you repurpose and now it's just creativity and ideas and changes and revisions until you work and rework it until you get to the final perfect version that everybody agrees and signs off on. So that is, if you've gotten past the technical part of, is it formatted correctly? Is it named correctly? Is it working in the game? Is it yes, it is working in the game, but is it actually playing back and playing back correctly? Those are the basic stepping stones, and oftentimes the client is not going to understand what's wrong and why it's not working. So if there's any technical issues, sometimes that can be on you to figure out. It depends on like how deep the problem is. Technical, when I'm saying technical issues, I'm talking about DAW issues. I didn't name it right, I didn't bounce it right, I didn't loop it right, I didn't edit it right, something like that. Not like the game itself. That's not on. That's not a composer's technical concern. But the things, since we had those 3 videos completed, posted on and shared on YouTube, easily a very easy format to share with a client and to discuss exactly like we did. Then a lot of times, because most of my clients that I work with are remote and I never see them in person, so we get on a video chat just like this and we share the screen and we take a look at it and we listen to it together and we say, this is good, this is bad, change this, do that, and it's then you go back and you rework it and keep going at it. So the seeing the final result, I always think that the videos end up being like the sum is greater than the individual parts. Where when we do peer review last week, we loaded up in Logic and we kind of went through with a microscope and pointed and clicked on certain things and discussed certain aspects. And then you add in sound effects, and then you add in the mix and putting it into the game and making it work, and the graphics and the actual playing and having fun with the game. A lot of those details kind of become more invisible, and it ends up being a much more fun and complete audio experience. So it's always enjoyable to see the final results of all that. So, all right, excellent stuff. Good things to discuss, and good things to check out. So now that you have done the first round with our first project, 2D platformer, we will now go into the second 2 weeks and get into our second project. If I go here, there we go. So this is FSO, and here in week 3, you have the new Angry Bots composition with a series of videos that reference the composition in the preparation, recording, and composition of this type of project. A couple of different approaches to help you get started. Then we have a chiptune composition, where, since we're going to talk a bit about, we did talk about the history of music and technology and genres of music for games. We're going to give you a bit of a taste of that with a particular composition here, where the main restriction is using the original limitations of the original Nintendo system. So we discussed that the NES had 4 basic waveform channels, and you're going to compose a composition using those same restrictions. So I'll discuss that here in a bit. And then we have the opportunity to submit next week for peer review. Had a few more people or different people submit this round, which is always excellent. We always want to encourage everybody, or as many people as possible, to participate, so we can get a variety of different projects there. And then the rest of we got the class and suggested reading material. So that's what we have in store. Let's discuss your project for this week. Our new game called Angry Bots. So as I mentioned, where'd it go? Hopefully you took the opportunity to download this week's game. Maybe you have played it and taken a chance to get a sense of what the game's about. Maybe took a look through the documentation. But a new game this week requires a new style of music and a new music soundtrack and new sound effects. Now that you've gone through the process once, you basically have the structure or the schedule for everything, and we're going to follow very much the same flow for Angry Bots, where this week you'll do the composition, next week you'll do all of the sound design, and you'll put it into the game and create a video capture. So this game, again, is called Angry Bots. It is made by Unity Games using the Unity game engine. We'll talk a bit more about that this week as we dive into some of the technology of getting your music to work actually in the game. And the Unity game engine is a very popular tool to make all sorts of different types of games. If you play a lot of mobile games, iOS and Android games, then more than likely you've played something that's been built on the Unity game engine. And Angry Bots here is a kind of a game demo where not only is it a game, but you can actually get access to all of the art and the music and the sound and the code and the program, like all the pieces of it. And so the people that were learning art can tear it apart on that side, and the people that are learning code and programming can tear apart a game project like this from that point of view. And we over here on the music and sound team are going to reference it and use it as a demo for showing off our music and sound. So this type of game, it's a much number one, it's a much more full and complete game. It does actually take like 5 or 10 minutes to get through from beginning to end. It does actually have an end. It is what might be considered like a complete game level of a much larger game. It is kind of certainly a darker and grittier style overall. It's modern and kind of futuristic, a much more intense feel than 2D platformer from last round. It is having this sort of modern approach to the game, or kind of futuristic feel. You are this mercenary who's infiltrating the robot factory, and the robots are certainly not happy that you're there, and so they are there to take you out, and you're going to battle your way deeper and deeper into this factory. So there are battles that are constantly happening, and that's one of the main thing. Well, that is the main thing that we are directing our music from. The main musical idea that we're focused on in this composition is the idea of ambient and action. Our music is going to need to transition smoothly between ambient gameplay and action gameplay, where ambient doesn't refer, like, it's not a room tone or rain or anything. It's not like a sound effect ambience. It also doesn't mean the genre of ambient music, meaning that it's just like slow and drone and boring and doesn't move or change. Ambient just means less than action. There's no battle going on at that point. So this is often referred to as battle and exploration. So during exploration, you're just kind of wandering around. There's no bad guys around. All of a sudden, a robot jumps out or a bad guy jumps out, and the action music kicks in. And we have to be able to switch musically, seamlessly back and forth between a lower intensity ambient game state and a higher intensity action game state. Question here in the chat. Do you think a minor key signature would be appropriate for this game? Absolutely. For this, you're going for intense and battles and firefights and robots and explosions and heroic and adventure and all of these big and intense ideas. It's a lot easier to get away with that in a minor key, even with some kind of diminished tonality to it, where it you can get that intensity and that tension from a minor key, versus with a major key, it's going to be sometimes what I'll get in the music is it's like too laid back and chill or happy. That's the problem with a major key in this instance. Unless you're going for strictly heroic and I've already won and beat the game, then a major key works can work a bit better. But sometimes what I get is, hey, maybe the robots aren't so bad with this music, or I get like happy dance party with the music, where it's upbeat and like a strong dance beat, but it's still like not too dark and intense, and like you have to imagine that these robots are chasing you with lasers and rocket launchers, and they are really mad that you're there, and certainly you're there to defeat them, and nobody's happy about it. So you want to avoid anything that's too slow or laid back or easy or happy or too silly or anything like that. You want to make sure that you're going for that tension, that intensity, that aggressiveness, that action feel as you go back and forth. So let me switch over real quick to the PDF. Where is that? When you not only do you get the video here and the game, you get a PDF that looks like this. And let me go through a couple of things, and I'll talk about the actual WAV files and the delivery and like what you're actually creating here. Game overview. It's going to talk a lot about ambient and action. This is really a summary of everything that I'm talking about here, where, and this is a very common approach in games. Angry Bots is known as a third-person shooter, which means most of the game you're battling some evil bad guy, and you've got either a laser or a machine. In this case, you're equipped with like a machine gun, and you are constantly going back and forth between moving through the level and actually engaging and battling with an enemy. Very, very common approach in games, and this is a challenge that a lot of games and a lot of game composers encounter. I have to quickly and musically go back and forth between lower intensity and higher intensity, and I have no clue when it's going to happen. So what we do is we create music at lower intensity and higher intensities, and we figure out a way to transition back and forth. So, and we'll talk about how that is going to work. How to play. Maybe you've already gotten a chance to play the game. Definitely take the chance, play the game, get a sense or a feel of it. If you're familiar with mouse and keyboard gaming, then W, A, S, and D work, or you can use the arrow keys to move forward, back, left, and right. The mouse aims, and left click fires the weapon. Reference listening. There's a couple of different game soundtracks to reference in this sort of style. Musical style, high-end energy, over-the-top music production style, like fast electronic or epic metal. Big, loud, strong, intense music styles definitely help this composition, this project. So rock, metal, electronic, heavy orchestral, that type of instrumentation will work. Synths, large pads, driving bass lines, gated effects, sweeping filters, bouncing delays, fast percussion, heavy distorted guitars, big fast drums, large brass and strings, cymbal swells. All of those are just big, loud, strong, impactful instruments. So that is the main theme, the main aesthetic that we're going for. Music system, more about ambient and action, and I'll take you on a play-by-play here in a little bit. And also I got some examples to show off with screenshots and a bit of information about each one of the cues. And here at the asset list. All right, so ultimately what you will be delivering are 7 audio files, and they are an ambient loop that is going to be over a minute long. All of these are going to be 16-bit 44.1 stereo files. Ambient loop, then 3 action loops. They're each going to be 8 bars. The ambient loop is heard when you are not battling with one of the robots. The action cues are heard when you are battling with one of the robots. And there are 3 different types of robots. Each gets their own individual action theme. Those action themes are only 8 bars. You might have noticed in the video that the battles are really quite short. You don't have to, it doesn't really take all that long to actually defeat one of these robots. So you want to make sure that the music doesn't constantly jump in and jump out and on and off. So we have to, we'll have to address that aspect of it. But the 8 bars, most of the battles are not going to even make it through 8 bars of music. Or even if it just loops one time, that'll take up most of the battles. So beyond, these are the main 4 pieces of music that's mostly going to be heard. Music stingers. The stingers are there. Notice that they're really short, only 1 to 3 seconds, and they are strong, sharp impacts that are meant to hide the transition between ambient and action. So let me take a moment here. Let me go back to the video and give you the play-by-play of how this is going to work. Actually, let me take one quick pause here before we get into this and let the video roll. Let me know if you have any questions so far. Okay. Let me back this up here. So, I'm going to start talking about the ambient and the action cues first. We have one ambient cue that is a minute long. It's the longest file because it's going to be heard most often. Then your 3 action cues, those are each 8 bars long, and those happen when the battles happen. So let's talk about how the game knows how to switch back and forth between these pieces of music. If nothing else is happening, and from the start of the game, you hear the ambient cue. If the player just finds a corner and just stands there forever, they are going to hear that ambient cue. Here in the chat, how long can we go on with the ambient music? The cue is supposed to be 1 minute to 2 minutes long. I have some examples, and I'll kind of discuss more of the content and what they might sound like here in a bit. The ambient, so if nothing else is happening, they're going to hear that ambient cue. So that's why it's so long. If they just stand around doing nothing, it's just going to keep going around and around. So then, how does the game know when to switch to action? And then how does the game know when to switch back to ambient? And we said that the action music is heard during the battles. So then how does the game know when the battles are happening? So let's go through this. So the ambient cue plays. This robot here is called the buzzer bot. And it's kind of like flies around, and it's meant to be like annoying, I think, and zaps you. It has this laser, like a lightning bolt that comes out, shoots out right there, and zaps you, and just kind of flies around. It doesn't take much to defeat it, and it would just kind of keep flying around and keep zapping you. So this is a battle, right? As soon as it zaps you and you fire it at it, there's some battle going on. So we need to have the game know that that's happening. So the real answer here is that the game uses health points in the game to determine when the battles start and stop. So your character has health points, and the enemy robot has health points. You have a whole lot more health points than any one robot. So it takes a lot of hits on you constantly all the way through the level to do much damage. But for a robot, it really doesn't have much damage or much health points, so it doesn't take all that much to defeat it. So as soon as somebody loses health points, the game is going to switch from ambient to action. So the game always knows which characters are on screen. It knows which robots are there, and it knows where your character is. So as soon as somebody takes damage, as soon as you get zapped here, the game says, oh, the main player has taken damage, so that must mean the battle has started. So we are going to switch from ambient over to action. And this happens immediately. It hard cuts from one to the next. And you are not guaranteed in where you are going to be in the ambient queue when this switch happens. So it's just going to hard cut from one to the next. And that works because you're in battle now. You just got lost health points. You just took damage. All right, now it's on. We're going to battle for a little bit. And then somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, and the music will have to shift. So from the beginning of the game, the ambient cue is playing until somebody takes damage. And at that point, the action music starts. And then until at some point, somebody is at 0 health. Either your character, but more than likely it's one of the robots. So that robot now goes to 0 health, and the game knows that the battle is over. So it doesn't immediately hard cut back to the ambient queue. It's a strong change in intensity. Going from lower intensity ambient music to higher intensity action music works because it's kind of like when your friend jumps out around the corner and scares you, your heartbeat kind of just skyrockets. It like jumps up real quick and it's pounding suddenly, and your natural reaction is that your heartbeat can jump up very, very quickly. So the pace of the music can jump up quickly because now the battle has started. But when your friend jumps out and you realize, oh, it's just your friend and there's no danger, well, your heartbeat doesn't just drop back to where it was. You have to breathe a little bit and calm yourself down, and it returns back to where it was. So we're going to do the same thing with the music. Going from ambient into action, from lower intensity to higher intensity, we're just going to make a sudden jump up. But when the battle is over and you're going from high intensity to low intensity music, we're going to slowly crossfade over 3 seconds to return it back down to normal before the next battle starts. So ambient music is heard. Zap, now the action music instantly hard cuts. Battle is now over, and it crossfades out for 3 seconds. Next one. These are called spider bots, and they're basically like bombs on legs. They jump awake there, and they chase you. They don't have any attack. until they get close enough, and then they just kind of explode. So same sort of thing here. When these guys jump awake like that, they kind of light up. You can see here, this guy jumps, just kind of like pops up. Then the action music immediately starts. With these guys, the battle music or the action music starts when they turn on or they wake up. So this spider action cue plays 8 bars. It loops around and around. Here it would probably play a little longer because I kind of just toy with it and dance around. But eventually, either you destroy it or it gets close enough and it self-destructs. So here's another one. As soon as this jumps awake, the spider action music would start. The battle goes until it's over, and then after 3 seconds, it fades back to the ambient cue. And then as the player progresses through and explores through the level, they're going to hear the ambient cue until the next robot, as this guy jumps awake, then it switches to the spider music instantly, battle's over, and over 3 seconds it fades back. This robot is called the Mech Bot, coming down the hallway here. It's sort of like a boss battle. A little bit more. It takes a little bit more to beat these guys. They're bigger and slower, and they cause more damage. So typically, this is going to be the biggest, strongest part of your composition. These guys are going to be big and have big percussion and drums and strong bass lines and loud, rhythmic, powerful music. With this composition, you can have more variation in the instruments than you did in 2D platformer. When we talked about 2D platformer, we said that all of the cues need to have similar instrumentation so that it seems consistent and almost invisible as it jumps from one to the next. With this one, you should have more change and variation in the instruments that you choose from your spider action cue and your buzzer action cue and your mech action cue. You should have instrumentation that represents each one of these robots. So even if it's not on screen yet, you still can hear it and you know which one's coming for you. So your choice of instruments will match the overall approach or style of that particular robot. So let's listen to some examples here. And I will also talk about the stingers. All right, let's see if this works. So what I have here, these are 4 student submissions. This first column over here are ambient cues. They're about a minute long, minute to 2 minutes, and they are set up or meant to loop. Over here I have action cues. These are each 8 bars long, and each cue represents its own robot. So the instruments and the melodic theme and the rhythms should sort of reflect the feel of that particular robot coming after you. And over here, these are stingers. I'm going to talk a bit more about these as we listen to them and figure out what their use is. So we'll start here with the first ambient cue. So it starts out as just a kind of a pad or a drone, which it shouldn't just be a pad or drone all the way through. There needs to be a bit of rhythm, maybe even a melodic theme or idea, and there needs to be change in the instrumentation. Here comes a strong change. So sometimes I discuss the ambient cue could be thought of more like musical sound design. There is a couple of ways to approach it. You could go with something that is more traditional composition, where you have drums, bass, harmony, and melody, and use and develop those ideas over the minute cue. Or you could use it as more texture and tones, taking more of a musical sound design approach. So it is using musical instruments, using synths, using effects and processing to create more of an interesting soundscape overall that might include, or probably should include, a bit of rhythm. Do you have having a little bit of percussion or rhythm in there foreshadows the pace that you have coming up in the action cues. So change and development, one of the biggest things that I find when grading these is that the instrumentation, once it's established in the ambient cue, doesn't really change all that much. So you want to make sure that you have variation and development over the course of the cue. With the action loops, or the action cues, these are set up to loop. They are 8 bars. They need to be strong and intense. One of the main things we're listening for compositionally is making sure that the action cues are the loudest and strongest portion of your mix. However big and loud and strong you make the ambient cue, your action cues just need to be even bigger and louder and stronger. So typically full drum kit or strong kick snare pattern, a memorable lead that is recognizable for that particular robot, powerful bass lines. Intensity is the main thing that we're listening for. So here are, we have one 8-bar cue for the buzzer cue, we have one for the mech, and we have one for Spider. Set up to loop. There should be some variation and difference between the first 4 bars and the second 4 bars. You'll hear this mech cue has different instrumentation. Kind of represents a different feel for the cue. Third one here, Spider. So you can hear that each one has its own rhythm. It has its own melodic and harmonic and strong bass instrumentation. So these are going to create a particular voice or theme for that robot. And making sure as we go back and forth, you are probably best to maintain a similar key as you switch back and forth between the ambient and all 3 action cues. That way there isn't a strong harmonic jump between the 2 cues, especially as you're kind of going back and forth pretty quickly. You typically want to maintain a similar tempo through all of the cues, but use double time and half time to create variations in the rhythm. So in your action cues, let's see, this buzzer cue is more of what I would consider the bass tempo of everything. Then the mech has more of a halftime feel because it's a bigger robot, stronger, kind of lumbering around. Well, they're actually at a similar tempo and feel, but they both have a halftime feel. Then with the spider cue, it's got more of a double time feel. Sitting on those eighth notes because it kind of matches like the skittering feet of the spider bot as it roams the level. So using things like halftime and double time can definitely help create the intensity change as you move back and forth. In the chat here, I would like to create more of a soundscape for the ambient cue, but I'm not very good at composing electronic music styles. Do you think there's a way to go between electronic sounds for the ambience and orchestral for the action? I might actually go for orchestral for the ambient because you have more time to develop melodic and harmonic ideas, and then with the action cues, since they're short and meant to be much more intense and a little bit kind of techy and robotic, switching over to action for those, especially since you may not feel as comfortable with the action or with the electronic side of things. So yeah, the answer is yes. You can go, well, I wouldn't say entirely go back and forth. Probably a better way of approaching is, let's say you do most kind of more of an electronic feel for the ambient cue. Have some strain of orchestral instrument, maybe a cello or some brass risers or something in the ambient cue that's then much more focused in the action cue, and the same both ways. So whichever order you choose the different genres, then have an instrument or a layer of each one of them in the other ones so that it's not just such a strong difference between them. So, all right. Yeah, I would think those would be good approaches for that. Now, I want to talk about the stinger cues and their use here. Two issues with how the music is going to switch by itself. As I mentioned, when we go from ambient to action, it is a hard cut. So I'm going to fake all of this and set this up in Logic here. So let's say we were rolling through our ambient cue, and then a buzzer bot came out to attack, and we are going to hard cut from one to the next. Let me just make sure that that's somewhat lined up. It's going to hard cut from ambient over to action. You know what? I'm just going to do it all on the same track. So I'm going to just drag these around. It's going to hard cut from ambient over to action. And then when action is done, it is going to crossfade back into ambient. So let me create a crossfade here. Something like that. Now the game, of course, is going to do this way better than I am. Just clicking around here in Logic. But general idea is ambient loop plays, buzzer bot jumps. The battle starts with the buzzer bot. It hard cuts from one to the next. You beat the buzzer bot. It crossfades out over 3 seconds and fades in over 3 seconds back to the ambient loop. I have no idea if that's actually 3 seconds, but hopefully we can get the idea here. So I think here's the ambient cue. And it's going to hard cut over to the buzzer. And the battle's over, and it's going to crossfade back to ambient. and goes back to ambient and allows the whole process to start all over again. So one thing you might notice is that change and transition in the buzzer cue is very sudden. And so having some instrumentation of the ambient cue also present in the action cues helps that transition a little bit. But the stingers also help that quite a bit. So the stingers are going to sit here. Go off the fade tool. They're going to sit right, oh my goodness, I lost it. Right where the action cue comes in. And they are there to help this transition so that it isn't so sudden. It kind of takes attention, distracts, and says, hey, look over here, listen to this real quick while I switch from one to the next. And it also provides randomness and variation. Every time you battle one of the buzzer bots, you are going to hear that exact same buzzer bot action cue. But each time it's going to randomly choose one of 3 stingers to play at the front to create some variation, some randomization. So let's try this. I don't even know if this is going to work or sound correct, but whatever. We'll see what it sounds like. And it sounds very, very quiet. That's what it sounds like. So it provides a little variation there, so that it creates distraction, and there's change every single time one of these plays. Yeah. So you got that. You got one there. Got one there. This is less than exciting. This one's kind of less than exciting. This one works very well. So a stinger should be a short, sharp impact that using musical instrumentation. It should not have anything rhythmic or harmonic or melodic, because that can run the issue of clashing with the action cues. So you want to make sure that it hits really hard and then gets out of the way very quickly. Here's some other stingers. This is a bad example of a stinger, right? That's just like a short 90s orchestra hit. That one works all right. I would say that is the most basic form of a stinger, which is like a big bass drum or kick drum and a cymbal crash. That one's more of like a sound effect. Every once in a while I'll hear sound effects. You got to watch out for that. Let's see how well these work. These work well. These are more like, if you're familiar with EDM drops, big builds and impacts with kicks and cymbal crashes and turnarounds, there should be, those are very good kind of templates for this kind of sound. They should not be a musical phrase like this. This is another bad example. So musical phrases that have rhythm and tone to them are just going to cause issue when they're played against the action cues. So something that's quick, something that has a sharp, strong impact at the front, something typically with a big bass hit or bass drop in it, something with often a cymbal crash works, and then some cool modulating sound that either kind of twists and turns or gates or stutters or there's all sorts of fun effects that you can use right along with it. So stingers, again, are there to cause distraction and create some variation in the playback of your music. Let me try some other ones here. So here is an ambient cue. This one's more like what I would consider a traditional composition, with progression and melody, rhythm, and changes throughout the cue. And then there is, here's the action cues. So you make sure that it brings up the intensity and pace of the music. So hopefully these are going to be giving you some good ideas and direction for this composition, and ways that you might head. Other ideas here. Make sure your composition matches the genre of the game. Again, it's much more of a stylistic approach than 2D platformer. We did leave 2D platformer a bit more wide open to your compositional approach to it. So this make sure you match the style and feel. Ambient and action need to transition immediately. So keeping the same rhythm, key, and similar instrumentation between both helps that process. Action transitions back to ambient after 3 seconds. You don't know when anything is going to be triggered, so watch out for timing differences. Tempo changes, time signature changes, all of that cause just rhythmic hardships in your composition. Most of the rest of that is stuff that is pretty standard. Okay, so take a look through the PDF, watch the video, play the game, start getting some compositional ideas together. And I failed to mention, actually, let me go back to FSO here. I didn't even talk about the fact that none of this is actually due this Sunday. We have spring break next weekend. So I'm sure we're all going to the beach and partying all the time. And no, I'm sure you're at home practicing your scales and your chord progressions and being a good student. Whatever you end up doing on spring break, or maybe just sleeping, whatever. Then you don't actually have your homework due this Sunday. It is due the 23rd, the Sunday after spring break. So also no class next week. We will meet back up in week 4, but that did just the schedule did remind me that we don't have anything due directly this week. So maybe you work on this for a little while, and you also work on our other composition for this week, your chiptune composition. So as I mentioned, we talked a bit about the history of game consoles and different music genres, the technology and the music and the capabilities of games over the different decades. And you're already getting a feel for what it's like to compose for modern games and modern styles. But to give you a sense of where we are at now, we're going to go all the way back to where this began so you can see what some of the ideas and challenges that they were dealing with then even are still some of the same challenges we deal with today. But you are going to compose in the style of what is commonly known as 8-bit chiptune music, or also sometimes known as Nintendo music, because it sounds very much in the style and limitations of the original Nintendo system. So in our discussion last week, we said that most of the melody and harmony and rhythm of these original Nintendo soundtracks were created with 4 basic waveforms. There was a 5th sample channel that was used, but most of that was also can be used for sound effects. So a lot of the melody and harmony and rhythm was done with these 4 basic channels, and those are 2 pulse wave channels or square waves, 1 triangle channel which was mostly for bass, and 1 noise channel, that white noise channel, that was for percussion. So provided with this assignment, you get the PDF that kind of outlines everything. But provided with this assignment, you get a logic session that has everything that you need to work on this composition. And so mainly we're concerned with the restrictions, like composing within the restrictions of the original Nintendo. So you only have 4 simultaneous sounds. These 4 channels each have an EXS24 loaded up on them, and in that EXS24 there are sound banks that have sounds and waveforms pulled from the original Nintendo system and the Famicom system, which was the earlier version of the Nintendo in Japan. So you listen through these and you'll probably hear some very, very familiar types of sounds that you can use for your composition. So those sound banks are loaded up across tracks 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you are limited to only 4 tracks at any one time. Now, that means you can have more than 4 tracks, but only 4 ever play at once. So we've easily had people with compositions that are 10s and 20 tracks deep that are just constantly switching between different layers. So, and the original Nintendo could do this. It only could play 4 sounds simultaneously, but it could switch between the timbre or the tone of those sounds very, very quickly. So we have those loaded up. So how you use those 4 channels is up to you. Another requirement of this project is you have to have drums, you have to have a melody, and you have to change the sound or the tone of that lead melody at some point in the composition. So you need to have drums, you need to have melody. That means you have 2 channels left. That means you can have drums, bass, harmony, melody. You could have drums, bass, melody, counter melody. You could have drums, harmony, melody, melody. Just there's all sorts of fun combinations. So what instruments you choose, up to you, with the limitation or with the restriction. You have to have drums, you have to have melody. Then what else? What other? You can change your lead sound. You can have multiple sounds, but only 4 at any one time. when we started this composition, when we started this project, I was kind of worried about the quality of the compositions because the sounds are so bad, quote unquote bad, that that it would end up sounding like I don't know, like Fisher Price music or something really cheesy overall. And I found that compositionally, these are some of the best projects because this, again, since the sounds are so bad, you are kind of focused on using harmony and melody to create more interesting compositions. I think some of the maybe drawbacks of having almost endless choices in your DAW is a lot of people, they spend a lot of time when they're starting to write music just switching between sounds, switching between presets, trying to find a cool and interesting sound. And once they find that sound, then they write a melody around whatever that sound is, versus the other way around, of writing a melody first compositionally and then determining what sound you actually want it to sound like. Well, in this composition, the sounds are so bad that's not really much of the concern. So you're focused so much more on harmony and melody, you end up getting some pretty strong results. So I have a couple of examples here that I want to play, and somewhere. I think this is going to work. I may not have complete volume control, but here, these are all student submissions from this composition. Now, these are some of the best, but this just shows you where this can go overall. Oh, hold on, I don't think I have. I want more volume control. Hold on. Let's try this. Down a little bit. Okay. Especially a part like this. So, lots of movement. Again, since the sounds are so bad, having a lot more melodic movement, more shorter, more staccato notes and instruments or tones to it is a great way of going. So faster, more staccato compositions allows for enough movement that you don't sit there and sustain on a bad sounding sound too long. Here's another approach. So I had to go back and check, but that was only ever 4 channels at any one time, and matched all the limitations of and the restrictions of the assignment. So the only other thing to point out is you do get some basic processing. The original Nintendo had basic volume control, so we have a compressor. It had a filter, but we'll have an EQ. It could fake a delay. Well, it had delay, and it could fake a reverb from that. Certainly didn't have the quality of Space Designer, but we're not following all the restrictions to the T. So check out the assignment. Check out the sound banks that are provided. A couple of reference links to listen to. It doesn't have to loop. It doesn't have to be interactive in any sort of way. And you'll bounce it out as an MP3 file. So those are your assignments for this week. We checked out the 2D platformer submissions and saw some really good stuff there. We have spring break next week, so we will meet again on Friday, and I'll probably say all this again, but we won't have anything due this Sunday. It'll all be due at the end of the week on the following Sunday. So we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. If you have any questions, go ahead and stick around, and we can discuss anything. But other than that, have a good rest of your Wednesday afternoon, and we will see you again on Friday. Thanks a lot.